Hey, so you want to raid? My name is Taylor, and this is the most in-depth guide to the Voracious Void Raid you can find anywhere else. While many guides already exist and share great information, they often lack the nuance to teach you how to adjust for unusual circumstances. With the information given here, you will have the tools needed to consistently hit upwards of 9 wins per session, and the guideposts to teach every role you'll ever need. Before we get started, I just want everyone to know that my Discord is in the link in the description, and I'm starting my own guild, so if you want to join up and raid with me, that's where you can go. So check that out. So let's set up the raid. All timestamps will be pinned below in the comments for ease of access. The roles and raids go as follows. There are 4 Vanguards. On the right side, typically you will find a Jade and a hitter which will be buffed by that Jade. On the left side, you'll see 2 other hitters that will hit in a more spam style. There will be 5 people on combat team outside. The roles here might be slightly different depending on your strategy, but will generally go as follows. Elf support, elf hitter, primary combat surge, primary pulling, and the role which will be more so a flex role. There will also be 3 drummers, drums close, middle, and far. Let's talk about gear. As a general rule of thumb, most everyone's stats should be about 50 to 60 pierce with around 180 damage. This is while maintaining perfect pip and accuracy. More importantly, you will need cantrips. Vanguards will need anywhere from rank 5 to 8 cantrips, and outside members will need at least rank 1, but it would be beneficial to have a rank 5 as well. Drums are super easy. This is probably the position you'll be assigned if you're new to raiding or you don't have the stats for maybe harder roles. As soon as the raid gate opens, mana will begin to drain from the Vanguard team. Each drummer will be assigned a position. You will head toward your assigned zone. Close will be on the left, mid will be on the middle, and far will be on the right. The close drummer will stand on a large yellow pad at the start of the game. There will be smaller pads immediately surrounding it to tell you how many drums are left to complete the game. Mana will consistently and slowly drain until you finish. Missing any of these pads results in extra mana drain and the game immediately resetting. Each position is responsible for a select number of medium-sized pads. Close will be responsible for 5 drums and the starting pad, mid for 4 drums, and far for 3. These are marked on your screen right now for convenience. The best method to consistently hit these is to rotate your screen back and forth between all the positions that you personally cover. As soon as you see your pad turn yellow, run to it. After it turns green, immediately try to spot the next yellow pad. If you see it and it's in your zone, move to it. If not, head back to the middle of your zone. If you see someone else's drums and they're not aware, tell them. The better you can make each other, the less mistakes you will have. After completing 8 pads, you will see a message that tells you mana drain deactivated. At this point, the close drummer, or any of them who feels like it, will note the current time. In exactly 3 minutes, the mana drain will start again. Remember, the close drummer must step on the large pad to start the game. Throughout the entire raid, you will be asked to move through other tasks, but please remember, you must come back every 3 minutes. The positions of these drums will never change. A couple things before I move on. Drummers have no stat standards. Putting movement speed gear on will not help you walk faster. If you walk into a battle that's not used for a strategy, immediately flee. If you walk into a battle that is used for a strategy, you may need to modify from here. Once the final gates are opened and the Vanguards are fighting the final boss, black wisps will spawn. They will slow you down exponentially when you touch them. Avoid them as much as you can. In any role on the outside, when you're not actively engaged in combat, or playing the drums game, or handling other responsibilities, you should be coordinating chests. There are 3 chests in the raid. These are the mana chest, the health chest, and the swift chest. The mana chest provides mana for both outside and the Vanguard. The health chest spawns health wisps on both the outside near the middle section and the Vanguards near the Nullity fight. The Swift chest removes the wisps of misfortune that slow you down. In order to unlock these chests, you must collect stars. Stars can be found all throughout the map, in both corners and in the middle of the streets. After one star is placed in the chest, you have 2 minutes to complete this chest by placing 10 stars down. If the time expires, this chest will be reset. Be warned, every person can only hold 1 star. To ensure success, wait until you know at least 4 people have a star and are ready before starting a chest. Generally, in each raid, you will need 2 cycles of the mana chest and 1 cycle of the health chest. Players should complete the first mana chest after the first set of drums, and the second mana chest after the second set of drums. While you're waiting, please ensure you always have a star in hand. Once the gate to the second street opens, you will gain access to the health chest. Immediately run toward this chest prior to doing any combat, and place your stars inside. Drums may be preoccupied, but if the game is done right, they should be complete in a minute. If everyone places their singular star into a health chest, the free combat player and drums team should be able to reasonably finish the last couple stars. After this moment, these chests can be pretty much ignored unless you're working on a badge, in which case failing a chest has no consequence. There are a few more responsibilities the outside team should know besides combat. Firstly, and pretty significantly, the gates. When you enter the raid, you will be locked to Zone 1. You will see a few totems where you can input a code and a lever sitting by it. Tokens will be given out by the Vanguard team after the first 3 fights, which answer the code. The Jaguar fight will match the middle token. The Badger fight, or in this case, the Fire fight, will match the left token, and the Ghost, or the Stormside fight, will match the right token. Only pull the lever once you know all 3 tokens. This will unlock a second zone, which will initiate the health chest as we just went over. This will also initiate the combat team's duties. The second gate is unlocked similarly to the first, the left side code being correlated to Unfun Guy, and the right side fight to Gobbler. The middle, however, is related to a pet token. So what's a pet token? Well, I'm glad you asked. While playing as your pet, you will be able to find a singular floating token somewhere in Street 2. You can only find this in pet mode. Find this token as quickly as possible, and announce it in chat, and immediately input it into the middle code if you can. While playing as your pet, you may also notice mounds on the ground. These will give you cantrip TC that may be useful for later, and also drop the Millispeeder key. Please note that this is something that I will talk about later, and if you choose to do the Millispeeder, you should be ready. One last significant piece of the outside that I should mention are the teleporters. There are 2 of them, they require 4 people to magic touch them, and will create a portal between Street 1 and Street 2, and Street 2 and 3. They are completely unnecessary, however, although to be thorough, I thought I would mention them. This may be the most important section to watch for anyone participating in raids. Raids are considered advanced combat, rather than what we would consider classic combat. In raids, all gear and card rules from PvP apply. Thus, you are given a damage cap and a PvP version of spells and gear. I will note that for some reason, and it is stated nowhere in the game, the damage curve in raids is slightly different than in PvP. Raids also take a lot of inspiration from Beast Moon. Turn order follows a zigzagging pattern where a player has a turn, then the enemy, and so on. Also like Beast Moon, when battles are won on the outside, all other combat will cheat cast a specific card on the next turn. Losing a battle means you lose your health. However, your mana will only drain once you concede. You cannot re-enter a battle, you flee, so leaving is a decision you must make wisely. Enemies in raids have extremely high resistance and damage stats. They also use Rochambeau's system to synergize with their already high base stats. All cheats and stats are related to this, so that can give you some idea of what to expect. Following the Rochambeau wheel, you can track the flowing direction to understand what schools play well into each other. Matching school types will hard counter each other, while schools which interact outside of the same spirit and elemental circle will soft counter each other. If an enemy is weak to your school, it will have reduced resistances. Regardless, the most important part is the cheats. This is what you must know, so I'm encouraging anyone in combat to take note of this. Ice and Death will always counter blades. Fire and Life will always counter traps. Storm and Myth do not interact with blades or traps. Balance will also not interact with blades or traps as a minion. However, they will take a pip should you get a shadow pip, and will weakness you when you hit 11 pips. The rest of the rules are less important for the sake of most strategies, but I will mention them here. Ice and Myth counter weakness, Fire and Myth counter shields, Death and Storm counter heal over times, and Storm and Life counter damage over times. In combat outside, AoEs will result in a 7-pip AoE response if that enemy should live. Lastly, Feint will result in the riding of scales from almost every enemy in the raid. The first job will be to take down Seraph or Brimstone. These are 2 combat circles that will be on the map, and you will decide which one you do based on the Vanguard's need. The Gobbler fight will typically need a specific buff, whether that be blades or traps. This will be based on Rochambeau. Depending on how you organize your raid, 2 to 4 people should do this fight. If you'd like to consistently hit 1 turn, I suggest running 3 hitters of the exact same school. It doesn't really matter which hitters join this fight as long as they have enough stats and they match the school. Since this card needs to be sent as quickly as possible, go in with all 4 people if you're capable. This is the 1-turn strategy. Your support will use a 35% Wildfire or Dark Wind found on an amulet or a jewel, and all 3 of the hitters will use a 5-pip TC. If your hitters have the correct stats and are all matching schools, this should pretty much kill every single time. Of course, every one of your hitters should have a 2-pip hit backup just in case. While other schools can certainly work, I will tell you that this may be less consistent. If you're doing this 2-man, you can do the following. Both the first and second player can blade or trap, frenzy or reinforce, and then use an 8 to 9 pip hit. If they both do this, the battle will be completed fairly quickly. Now that Brimstone and Seraph are done, let's talk about the other important combats. 1 is Elf, and number 2 is Shadow Surge. When killed, Thundering Elf summons a card called Retribution, which does 25% of the total HP of every enemy on the board. While you're waiting for the Nullity fight to start, the Elf team should go activate the crystals around Elf. They're marked here. Shadow Surge gives players in combat a full pip and a full shadow pip. In fact, Surge might be the most important card. Both combat teams will need to start combat when Gobbler is guaranteed to die. Start during the kill animation. Let's start with Thundering Elf. Thundering Elf does need a specific gear set up. I highly recommend you run a Storm hitter on this fight. Alternatively, a Fire hitter runs quite well, especially if you're willing to take an extra turn to do a 4-turn. Here is the setup for Storm and their support. So long as the support has less health than the hitter, the support will always be targeted. If you're doing this strategy and you do not have a 100% resistance set, I'd recommend on turn 1, double Storm shielding the person with the lowest health. It doesn't really matter who it is, it's just got to be the guy with the lowest health. This should be your turn by turn. The support will TC Stormblade, the hitter will Stormblade. The support will Elemental Blade, the hitter will Reinforce. The support will once again Elemental Blade, and the Storm will Scion. If you're using Fire, this is the turn by turn. Turn 1, you will both use a Storm Shield. Turn 2, and the support will TC Fireblade. The Fire hitter will Fire Blade. On turn 3, the Fire support will Backdraft, and the Fire hitter will Fuel. On turn 4, the support will use another Fuel, and the hitter will use Caldera Djinn. Surge will traditionally be taken on by 1 or 2 players, depending how comfortable your mob pooler is. If taken by 2, you would use the exact same strategy used in Brim or Seraph for the 2-man. You will both Blade or Trap based on Rochambeau, you will both Frenzy or Reinforce, and you will both use an 8 to 9 pip hit. If you're soloing, this will take about 5 turns. I highly recommend using Fire or Myth here, as they will both have a Gambit or a really strong 10 pip. This fight should go as follows. 4 turns of buffs for a Gambit or a 10 pip. On turn 5, you will hit. Fire can deal with shields by using Bottom Path Spell Elemented Elephant, and Myth can deal with shields using Shatter. There's one other combat I should mention. This is Monumental. Monumental is an important fight because it can make up for mistakes. Monumental is a enchant, so Vanguard will need to tell you if they need this pretty quickly. Once either your elf or your surge team has completed their fight, they can run in here. But don't necessarily kill right away. Make sure you know you're supposed to kill. This card should only be used if the Vanguards cannot get 5 buffs. This fight will have the exact same strategy as any 4, 2, or 1-man fight that I've already listed. This is the final significant portion of the outside guide. As stated before, depending on the skill level of the team, you will either want 1 or 2 people to start this out. Depending on who's who, either the assigned mob pooler or the flex roll will initially try and solo this. Mob pooling is going to be done on your screen in front of you right now, so you kind of get an idea of how it works. But mobs will not spawn until the Nullity fight is actually started. Mobs spawn about every minute or so, so you have a little bit of time to play around with them. The goal here is to keep the mobs from getting to the end of the street, while not actually spending the time to kill them. Mobs will spawn in the far corner of the 3rd street. Every minute, a mob spawns in that corner. To solo it, you need to run up to it and pull it into a fight. As soon as the fight reaches about 5 to 3 seconds, depending on what you're comfortable with, you will flee. It will generally try and walk back to its starting position, in which case you will immediately pull it again. You will do this a couple of times and there will be another mob that spawns. You will need to pull both mobs in the fight. Please note that you can see their icon on the map in the corner. Once people are done with combat, the first person available should come and assist you. Doing this with multiple people makes it a lot easier. However, there's still a lot of room for messing up. Remember the rules of combat. You cannot join a fight you have fled. So, the first person will pull a mob, and the second person will stand on the outside of the battle ring relatively between the mobs that are. As soon as that player, the timer reaches down to 2 seconds, you will swap positions. If 2 people are pulled into the combat, make sure everyone immediately flees besides the first person in the first position. Person can maintain these 4 mobs in this position infinitely. As new enemies join the fight, old ones will despawn. Repeat this process until the Nullity is defeated or the Vanguard team loses. If you fail at all on mob pooling, just continue the same strategy on the next sigil placement. So you're the big cheese, you're the Vanguard. Let's lay out all the optimal schools and gear for Vanguard. I'm going to be teaching the strategy, which requires using 2 fires, a storm, and a balance or life jade. There are modifications where you can run myth as your fires and many other schools as your storm. However, these strategies, while technically effective, will be less consistent and take more time. Your fire hitter will run the Aeon hat, robe, and boots with storm damage and storm accuracy pins. They will run the Nullity or Aeon wand, the Aeon athame, the Dragoon amulet, the Aeon or Nullity ring, preferably the Lord of Summer pet with double damage, double pierce, and mighty, and a Clockwork Corsair. The deck really doesn't matter that much, however you will need a triangle with crit and block, or at least that's preferred. Everything should have flat resistance, and yours or universal accuracy, depending on what you need. Storm has 2 gear set options, and they kind of depend on how much you want to pay King's Isle. The free-to-play option is with Dragoon hat, Aeon robe with myth damage and balance accuracy, Aeon boots with myth damage and balance accuracy, the Aeon wand, Aeon athame, Chain Amulet, or with the Eternal Amulet if you really need the extra resistance, the Aeon Ring, and a double mighty pet. Of course, once again, the Clockwork Corsair is going to be your best mount, and realistically, any deck with crit and block. The second, more pay-to-win option is to run full Aeon, except instead of using Aeon Wand, you will use the Headmaster's Sky Staff, as that gives a Mass Storm Trap card. Please note for both Jades, we're going to be focused more on survivability and card output rather than healing. For life, you'll run the Eternal Hat with Outgoing, Eternal Robe, and Eternal Boot. For all these, you'll want Myth Damage and Balance Accuracy. For the Wand, you'll either want to run the Wand of the Silver Order or the Headmaster's Law Staff, as it makes the pet requirement a little easier. For the Athame, I really suggest the Void or Eternal Athames, and you'll want to socket a 35 Darkwind or a 35 Wildfire in here. The Amulet, you'll need a Balance Mastery. For the Ring, you'll want Eternal or Void Ring. For the pet, you'll want either the Gobbler Ball if you have the Headmaster's Law Wand, or the Clamoring Gulcher if you have the Wand of the Silver Order. This pet should have Proof, Defy, Dark Pact, Medic, Healer, Mighty. The mount, obviously Mini Mammoth will be preferred here. And for the deck, anything with a triangle and with a 35% Wildfire or Darkwind will be needed. You will be needing both of these, especially the Wildfire. For a balanced Jade, you'll run pretty much the same setup. Eternal Hat, Eternal Robe, Eternal Boots, Headmaster Law Staff, Silver Order Wand, Eternal Athame, Fire Mastery, Eternal Ring, the Gobbler Ball or Gulcher with Proof Defy, Relentless, Dark Pact, Storm Ward, and Sharp Shot, and any mount, and a deck with a 35% Wildfire. So let's look at our decks. For the fire hitters, you'll be using two slightly varied decks. For this worst one, this is the following setup I would recommend. For this deck, we'll be running Curse in our sideboard. However, because of Curse's rarity, one of the ways you can get around this is to use a Fire Wardle pet. This pet gives you a Hex card you can run in your deck over the Wildfire. For the second fire, this is the deck you will run. You will need to spend a couple of Azoth every run, and you will be using Hex as a default treasure card. The Storms deck will look like this. Lord of the Squall is the best AoE for raids. However, it typically is slow, but it's not needed. You can generally run Sirens, however, though having Lord of the Squall is great when things go wrong. For both the Life and the Balance examples, the Mass Hex and the Mass Storm Trap can be swapped out, depending on what you have. This is the Life deck. And this is the Balance deck. Let's get into combat. Before we get started, here's a couple really important notes. When you're pulling a boss into a fight, always pull the minion first. This will make sure the boss goes second and save some health. Also, you shouldn't really need it, but if you really need health and you don't have the healing, this is why we have cantrips. Please use them. The first boss we'll fight is known as Big Cat Burglar, more commonly known as Jaguar. Jaguar is a fire and ice boss, meaning that you can't blade or trap. Among a few insignificant but rather obnoxious and time-wasting cheats, this boss is just a big baddie with 20k health. As a life, the life will go in first and pull the minion. One of the fires, preferably, will use Donate Power 1. There really isn't a need to do more if you have a life. On turn 1, the life will use Elemental Diffuse on Jaguar, and all the hitters will reinforce. For turn 2, the life will Wildfire, and both fires will use the Dragoon AoEs. The Storm will simply pass. For round 3, the life will pass unless they really need to heal, and the fires will use Dragoon, and the Storm will use Owl. For balance, you will use Donate Power 3 instead of Donate Power 1. This is, of course, unless there's a balance minion, in which you'll just use the life strategy. On turn 1, you'll do the same, Elemental Diffuse, Reinforce, Reinforce. Then you'll use Wildfire Dragoon, and then you'll go ahead and Owl. On turn 3, however, you will once again use another Elemental Diffuse, and then you'll spam Dragoon, and the storm will pass. This makes it so that you generally take less damage on this fight and save more time, but it does cost more energy. After the Jaguar fight, announce the token that he drops after his death. Next, the Fires will go over and fight Badger. Badger also goes by Honeycomb Horror. He's a pretty low health death boss, so that means you cannot Blade. For this fight, the Fires will simply use Reinforce, Dragoon, and Sunburn if they do not kill. That's it. Remember to announce the token when you're done, and you may need to check on the storm side just in case something went wrong. Continuing on the fire, let's face Unfun Guy. Unfun Guy is a 10,000 health balance boss who pretty much cheats with everything. You blade, he cheats. You trap, you cheat. You do anything, he cheats. You sneeze, he cheats. So the best method of killing him is doing exactly what the Fires did on the last fight and spamming buttons. Turn 1, Reinforce. Turn 2, Dragoon. Turn 3, Dragoon. And turn 4, Sunbird. If Unfun Guy uses Weakening Mantle, the Fire in the first slot may opt to use Wildfire to clear any weaknesses by exploiting Unfun Guy's cheats. Once again, please announce the token when you're finished with this fight. Onto the Storm and Life side, where things are a lot more complicated. The first fight they'll face is Ghost, also known as Flimtasm. This is a 14,000 health myth and life boss, meaning that you cannot trap him directly. However, you can technically use mass traps, which is how we're playing this fight. This fight being a life boss means there's a lot of things that can clear traps. Traps really struggle on this fight. In this fight, the Jade will pull the minion first, and the Storm will cast either Restoring Rain or Dual Strike depending on the mood of the fight. It's all depending on the minion. If the minion is Death or Ice, you'll cast Dual Strike. Otherwise, cast Restoring Rain. If you're going down the blade path of Flim, the round by round should look about like this. The Jade should turn 1 Dark Pact, and the Storm should Stormblade. Then the Jade should Elemental Blade, and the Storm should Reinforce. Then the Jade should use their pet, either Elemental or Stormblade, and the Storm should use their Sirens or Lord of the Squall, depending on anything was removed. Obviously, if something goes wrong, the Jade can either pass or heal, and the Storm can use whatever finisher makes the most sense. The exact order of the Jade is not very important, however, the provided order is ideal. Storm should use their cards in that exact order, though. For the trap version of Flim, after the Dual Strike 2, or above, the Jade will use Windstorm, the Storm will use Mass Storm Trap, the Jade will then use their either Mass Hex or item card Windstorm, and the Storm will use Reinforced. The Jade will then use Darkwind, and the Storms will use Sirens or Lord of the Squall, once again, depending on if anything went wrong. What makes this fight interesting is that Flim can use Blizzard or Centaur, which remove 3 blades or 3 traps respectively. If blades or traps are removed, use Lord of the Squall. In the case that everything goes wrong on Flim, and that is where Flim uses Centaur on turn 1, this is the following scenario. The Dual Strike 2 has been cast, the Jade Windstormed, and the Storm Mass Trapped. Flim used Centaur and got rid of basically everything. After this, the Jade should use Windstorm again, and the Storm should use their emergency TC Windstorm. The Jade will need to use their item card Windstorm or Mass Hex, the Storm will Reinforce, the Jade will Darkwind, and the Storm should use their Lord of the Squall. If you're Centaured before hitting turn, you can take an extra turn to reuse a Windstorm and add a TC Windstorm to compensate. In the case that the minion is balanced, just hit. Once you hit over 11 pips, the fight gets really bad. So in that case, hit as soon as possible, and then just try and buff up a finisher. Once Flim is done, announce token, and head toward Gobbler. Before you get into the Gobbler, announce what the school of the minion is. You can see it on the mini-map. Gobbler is a storm boss, and whatever the second school is on the map will be the minion. This tells the outside team whether to get Brimstone or Seraph. In the case of a ice or death, you will call out for Brimstone and use dual strike through 2. In the case of anything else, you'll call out for Seraph and use restoring rain 2. Gobbler, otherwise known as Gobblerian Bandit, is an 11k health storm boss, thus meaning you can use whatever you want, except heal over times and damage over times. This boss is also unique in that if the minion is a blade only minion, you can still use traps on the boss. However, I don't necessarily recommend this. On a blade Gobbler, you will once again cast Restoring Rain, the Jade will Dark Pact, Storm will Reinforce, Jade will use Elemental Diffuse on turn 2, the Storm will Blade. The Jade will use Elemental Blade or Storm Blade, and the Storm will use Sirens or Lord of the Squall. For Trap Gobbler, the Jade will Elemental Trap Gobbler, the Storm will Reinforce, the Jade will Elemental Diffuse once again, and the Storm will Mass Storm Trap. The Jade will use Mass Hex or Windstorm, and the Storm will Sirens or Lord of the Squall. If you haven't received Seraph or Brim by turn 3, try and double check if it's arriving soon. Stall if you need to. The Gobbler can use Rat Spin to remove traps or Blizzard to remove blades, so you'll need to use Lord of the Squall if either of these hit you. If you get Storm Lorded on the first turn, you should still try and hit turn 3 so long as Seraph or Brim has not been lost. Once again, if there's a balanced minion, you should probably just hit on turn 3 regardless, because once you're at 11 pips, things get interesting. At this point, health chests should have arrived, and inside the arena with the Nullity, the entire Vanguard team should be able to get health. The outside team should also be ready to kill Shadow Surge and Thundering Elf as soon as possible. So before we get in, let's talk about what the Nullity is. The Nullity is a 40k health boss that is 100% resistant to everything. Cantrips do work in this fight, however you have to be a little careful with them, as the Nullity has a lot of cheats, and we'll get into that in a second. At the beginning of the first round, the Nullity will force every wizard to pass, even if they've clicked something. At the end of this round, the Nullity will announce a school for the next 2 rounds. If the Nullity says the Nullity is fired up, this means the Nullity is in its fire phase. The Nullity keeps it cool, its ice phase. The Nullity is electrifying, its storm phase. The Nullity ascends to legend, its myth phase. The Nullity feels alive, the life phase. The Nullity foresees your doom, the death phase. However, inside the Nullity fight is also a minion. Once again, you should always be pulling these first. While the Nullity will have cheats based on whatever phase he's in, he will also mirror the cheats of the minion. So, say a fire minion spawns, that means while that fire minion is live, the Nullity will counter traps. But say the Nullity decided to become death. Well, during those 2 rounds, the Nullity will counter both traps and blades. This is why it's very important for that minion to die. At the end of this first round, Nullity will do one more thing, and that's to start the first cheat cycle of his buffs. The Nullity is prepping for an AoE Scion that takes the form of a Power Nova. On the first round of his cycle, he will use 1 buff for it, and the second round he will use a second buff for it. On the round 3, at the end, he will hit with that Scion. If buffed, that Scion will do a lot of damage, around 5 to 6k depending on which Scion it is. Your goal in this fight is to prevent that Scion from dealing double damage. You'll get hit no matter what. The Nullity will then repeat this, so on round 4, while you won't be forced to pass, the Nullity will decide. This is the 5-turn Nullity. To go into this fight, your Jade will go in first, pulling the minion. The Fire with the Balance Dispel will go second, and the Fire with the Spirit and Life Dispel will go third. The Storm will go last. On turn 1, everyone will be forced to pass. On turn 2, you will know what the school of Nullity is. The Jade should use Wildfire, and the 2 fires should both use Dragoon, and the Storm should reinforce. On turn 3, if you have not received Shadow Surge already, The run is going to be scuffed. On turn 3, the Jade or Storm will counter the Nullity depending on what it is. Everyone else will use a buff. If the minion is not dead, one of the fires should use Dragoon. On turn 4, the Jade will use Elemental Diffuse, the first fire will use Balance Dispel, and the second fire will attempt to use Spirit Dispel, and the Storm will use Shrike. If you needed Monumental, this would be the round to get it. On turn 5, every school will buff, and the Storm will use Owl. So, let's talk about countering and what to do on every version of the Nullity. In the case that there's a Storm Nullity, the Storm will counter by enfeebling this Nullity on turn 3. You will use Blades, preferably, as your buff. Blades generally are just stronger, so that's why you would choose this. If the Nullity is Life, the Nullity will use a lot of heal over times. There isn't a great counter to this, so the Storm will weakness the Nullity. And once again, you will use Blades. In the case of a Fire Nullity, the Jade will mash Triage, and you will use Blades. One other note is that on that Fire Nullity, do not cast Wildfire on turn 2. Blade the Fire Support or Elemental Trapped Minion instead. For the Ice Nullity, nothing is needed to counter generally because it's shields and you take those off by hitting, and you will use traps. For the Myth Nullity, you will use a mass Myth Trap and then a tri-trap. In this case, the Jade will Cleanse Ward the player with 4 traps, and everyone uses Blades. The Death Nullity, the Jade will cleanse the player with the 4 infections, and you will use traps. The Myth and Death Nullities only affect one person, so countering them can pretty easily be skipped in the event of an emergency. There are extra Cleanse and Pierce in these decks in case during turn 2 there's something goes wrong, in the case that a Storm is weaknessed by a Weakening Mantle, or there somehow gets a shield on the Nullity in phase 2, you can use Pierce to take it off. These should be considered buffs. Sometimes the Life Nullity can revive the minion if Retribution is too early, so the Fire Support can just Dragoon again if necessary. If for some reason on the 5th turn the boss didn't die, you had delay, or there were mishaps, you can always wait till turn 6. Remember, the Nullity doesn't hit till the end of this round, so if things really go wrong, make turn 6 the hitting round. Once you receive a trap or a blade, the Nullity is now able to use a Rat Spin or a Blizzard that will take off 3 traps or blades. So, when coming up with strategies, ensure that you are intentional about whether you are buffing or not. If someone were to die in the Nullity, of course with the exception of the Storm, simply flee and cast cantrips that add traps or blades to the fight, but only if you know what school it's going to be. As vaguely discussed earlier, the Millispeeder key can be found in pet mounts all throughout the map. In order to do this fight, you need the key, and you need enough people to do it. So, the Millispeeder will have a little blue icon, and that's where he'll spawn. Do not let him go into the Nullity fight. You will lose. The lever is right behind where people will be mob pulling, so it's fairly easy to find. The Millispeeder has one major cheat. The rounds you join, you will get dispelled for your own school like 7 times. You're not using your own school unless you find a way around it. Funnily enough, you can find a way around it. But simply by joining late, the Millispeeder will not dispel you. So, if you have 3 man, generally you just need 2 random people, to be honest, from the hitting squad, and a Storm hitter. Probably your elf hitter. The fight will go as following. Feint, donate power, reinforce. Turn 2, pet or T-Seam feint, item card feint, Scion. Alternatively, you can have a drummer leave their spot and help out, in which case you can 1-turn Millispeeder, so long as you use Dual Strike 3 and Restoring Rain 3. Feint, TC feint, item card feint, and use a 5-pip hit. The hardest part about this fight now should be beating it before the Vanguards are done with Nullity. As a couple miscellaneous notes to guild leaders, you can always turn off mounts with castle magic in the guild house. This pretty much prevents all crashing. Remember to ensure your guild refills their potions and gets their TC ready in time. And if you get 50 Azos per person, it refunds the whole key. Anyway, thank you for watching. This has been a long one and it's taken a lot of work to make this. If this helped you out in any way, please give it a like, subscribe, and share it around. And once again, I have my Discord links in the description where I am working on my own guild where we can join and we can raid a little bit together before the next raid comes out. In any case, you guys have a great day and goodbye.